It's where we translate everything that happens in our lives. All this down here is really just carrying that around. And so when we have impairment into our thinking and our reasoning process, it begins to change dramatically our behaviors. It's not an issue of people being bad people. It could certainly be related to maybe some bad choices to include that chemical in our lives. So it might be some choice issues, and we got to start looking at our choices. But it's not a bad person thing. And that's where we get a lot of stigma in our culture, and it keeps families from coming to events like this or to coming forward or to talk about their problems, because somehow, because addiction is so behavioral, it seems to indicate that we must be bad people because the behaviors are bad. That's certainly not the case. I'd say every one of us have had occasional bad behavior, and it doesn't mean we're bad people. Do you think you're a bad person? You occasionally broke that speed limit sign? Doesn't make you a bad person. It might have been a bad decision, especially when the cop comes, right? And so there's lots of things in our culture where people make bad choices, which doesn't inherently make them bad people. Well, addiction's no exception to that. And so we ask families to come to Family Day because when you sent your loved one into the Teen Challenge process and program, essentially what you said to them as a source of external motivation, to motivate them to go, by whatever those conditions were in their life, is you said, listen, I know you don't want to go to Teen Challenge, because the truth is there's never been one human being ever that's wanted to go to treatment or any rehab. You know that. People go because they're willing. No one wants dialysis, no one wants chemotherapy, and nobody wants to go to the dentist. If anybody goes to places like Teen Challenge and others, it means there had to be something that was predetermined that inspired the desire to go. You know what that's called? Pain. Pain and discomfort motivates people's desire to get the help they need. We don't sit around our home and say, honey, would you like to go dancing, or maybe a trip to get a root canal? There would have to be a predetermined factor to make getting a root canal an option. So your loved one doesn't want to come to Teen Challenge. I'm a graduate of Teen Challenge, came here in 2003 with 20 years of addiction. I never wanted to go to any rehabs, and I went to plenty. I was 37. But I came willing. And so what you said to your loved one is even though you don't want to go to rehab, because no one does, we would like you to go anyway. We'd like you to just take our direction, right? Trust us. Trust that by at least being in the process, something good could happen, and maybe you'll find out that there's a miraculous turn of events waiting on you there, and then maybe we can heal as a family. That's what you say to your loved one. And so now think of that in the context of Family Day. That's what we're saying to you. We know no one wants to get up early on a Saturday morning. You might be getting to a place to where maybe you are finding the desire to be here, because maybe you're starting to realize that you're learning a lot. Maybe you're getting more empowered and equipped. So it's engendering at least the desire to want to be in the room, so it's not at least antagony to want to come here. But you wouldn't even be here either if there wasn't first an adversity, right? We would have never even met. It took the inspiration of adversity. So we say to you, even though sometimes maybe you don't want to come, we need you to come anyway. Because if you're going to allow your loved one to be turned over and under our care, well, then our obligation to you is to provide you the greatest level of care that we're able to give you. That's our obligation as not just clinicians, but as people of faith. And so that's what we're asking you to do. So our hope is that everyone in the family understands that the family has essentially, to some degree, become addicted by the addiction. We all get to some levels of despair and distress and obsession, where we get so focused on the addiction that all of the domains of our life begin to get broken down. It's hard to be on the job, right? The social life you once had seems to ebb away. Marital relationships start to get strained. Our relationship with our other siblings as parents starts to get strained because our focus is on the one addicted sibling. So all the domains of life begin to break down. So what we have to do then is get everyone well in the family to feel equipped and to make a commitment to their own process of recovery, support, and wellness, independent of their person in addiction. So the Family Day is certainly to benefit the long stay treatment, ministerial process, and recovery of your loved one. But the way we're going to best do that is get your level of recovery, your level of equipment, and your level of support to the highest degree it can be, so that you can join in the process and all be moving in the same direction. These 14 trainings that we do are essentially trying to cover every aspect of how addiction wants to come into your family and divide and conquer you. So we're trying to give you the ammunition to combat that and to win that battle. And you can win that battle. Families not only can get through the process of an addicted family or addictive home or an addictive dynamic in their home, but when we get through these processes, what we often find is what comes out on the other side is a higher level of development as human beings. Adversity inspires development. That's the way it works. Addiction is no exception to that. So greatly of great importance then for us as families struggling with addiction is the decision on what posture we're going to take in terms of how we engage addiction. Do we see ourselves as victims and this is just a tireless grind and the best that's going to happen is we'll just be status quo, hopefully drug-free on the other side? That's going to be an arduous process. We're certainly not telling your loved one in this program that's the goal. We're telling your loved ones that you have come from the underground of the addiction to the level ground of treatment, recovery, and ministry to be released to higher ground that you may have never gotten to had you not first had the adversity. That's what we're saying to you. That's what we believe as believers of the Bible and our faith-based structure is we believe that adversity creates development. And the reason it's easy to believe that is because if we look at our own lives historically or the history of our nation, the greatest things that we've ever accomplished generally have come in response to two conditions. Either the presence of pain coming if we don't make a decision for change, and we developed into something greater to get ready for the pain that might come if we don't make a greater decision. Sometimes it's the presence of pain that causes us to grow and make a new decision. You've heard me say it before, a lot of times the reason we're going to college to get that level of development is because we don't want the discomfort of a low-paying job. Discomfort is one of the greatest motivators we have because what it's designed to do is create and inspire development. That's the whole purpose of it. The issue that we have in our culture and in our humanity is that we sometimes have a poor response to pain. What we sometimes will do is couple pain with pain. We try to solve a pill problem with a pill. I mean, we love to have simple solutions for complex problems. That's why every person that before they ever come to Teen Challenge, the first thing they want to do with you is go to some support groups first. I just want to go to an outpatient place, go 3 times a week. I want to go to a 30-day program. I'm not going to a year long, right? And so that's because everybody, and not people in addiction, humans, human beings, by nature, want a simple solution for a complex problem. What we soon realize is based on the complexity of addiction, because it's very complex because of what we said earlier. Addiction affects the most complex organism known to humanity, the human brain. The brain is so complex it actually can create systems that can do math quicker than itself. It's remarkable. And so when that becomes infiltrated, there's going to be a series of complexities that are manifested as a result of the damage to the infiltration of that complexity. So we have to have a complex response. This is part of the complex response. 14 trainings, getting support services when you're not at Teen Challenge, coming together as families, find out how close you live to each other and see if you can get together and have coffee together. You have the advantage of like-mindedness. You have the exact same struggle. There's incredible power in sharing the struggle, and there's even more incredible power in sharing the what? The victory. That you're going to be free no matter what choices your loved one makes in this program. You're going to get your independence and you're not going to be addicted anymore, regardless of whatever choices your loved one makes in this program. So now we're talking about you, right? We're not even talking about them. We're going to work on them as well, and you're going to provide influence and inspiration for them as well. But my hope for you, our hope for you as a program and as a staff, is that you're going to get to your level of independent thinking beyond the thinking and the actions of your loved ones that keep you bound. We're talking about a human dynamic now, and we're not talking about an addiction dynamic. We're talking about how we can no longer be held hostage by the behaviors of others. People in addiction and people with life-controlling issues don't have relationships. They have hostages. That's what they have. And so that's the segue that leads into our training, because what happens when people get addicted is the entire family begins to change their whole affect and behavior to cater to the needs of the addicted person. Generally, it happens from a parental view down where the addicted person is either the father or the mother. But it doesn't matter who is in the family. The family will begin to create roles around the behavior and attitude of the family in an attempt to survive. As human beings, we are extraordinarily adaptive. It's amazing how adaptable we are to crisis. I mean, think of some of the great adversity and the peoples that have had to adapt. The Jews of Nazi Germany, the Africans that came into the slave trade. I mean, the ability to adapt as human beings and survive is just astounding. And so this adaptability happens in the simple society of our families, and we begin to do whatever we have to do to what we believe we're doing is avoiding conflict. And so we all start to cater to the needs and the deficits of the family in these survival roles. And some of you who have maybe grown up in homes where there was an addicted person, like I did, I had a mentally ill mother, and I had a father that probably was an abuser, maybe more than alcoholic, but an abuser. So we all began to adapt, my sister and I and other members of the family, to the conditions of those adversities. And so as we go down this list of roles, what I'd like you to be thinking about is try to identify maybe your role. You may be able to identify how you responded to the adversity in your family. You may be able to identify it in terms of the current condition that we're trying to minister through now, right? You may be able to see where those roles exist. And so take each one of these roles as a lesson of learning, in the hopes that by learning this, it empowers you then to identify the behaviors of others, your own behaviors, and see if maybe there's some levels of development, some levels that need to be addressed in our own lives that are going to help us even as adults to be better adults. Because most of you that identify the roles, you're probably going to identify yourself as a child. Here's the thing I want to share with you. Whatever some of those behaviors were as that child, that role that you play, there's about 5 of them, and you identify yours, we're going to talk about how those behaviors and what's really going on inside of that child, let alone how they act. I want you to be thinking about, has those roles, if that was you, come into your current marriage, your relationship with others, some of those old behaviors from when you were a child. It's remarkable. They certainly did in my life. I took counseling to address some of those issues because they were very deep-seated. But there's freedom. That's the beauty of this whole training, and the beauty of this whole thing that we do at Teen Challenge is there's freedom beyond addiction. There's freedom beyond the devastation. And like I said before, we believe there's even a higher level of development and hope that can be inspired by it. And then you go out with that hope and you give it away to everybody else. In my opinion, I don't know why else we're on the planet if we're not agents of hope for others. I can't find any other reason. And so you become those agents of hope for others because you're going to be educated and equipped and empowered. And that's the other value of this, is that we hope you take all of this and give it away, because people need to hear what you learned. They're not here. You are. 23 million people in addiction in our culture. 23 million reported. 10% and their families ever make it into the process you're in. You know how you could look at that? You and I, because I went through this process, we're the plane crash survivors. You know how plane crash survivors respond to that level of grace? It changes their whole life. We're the plane crash survivors. You're a part of the 10%. Why us? I don't know. We'll have to get to heaven and get the details. But I don't need to know that now. I just need to know, okay, what am I going to do about it and how am I going to use it? The why, I may never figure that out. But I'm going to be able to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with this enormous level of grace, this enormous level of opportunity, and how am I going to use it to the benefit of our family and others? And that's my hope in your posture for this entire process. Okay, I have the power. Very nice. Nicely done. Addiction in the family, healthy family system. Look at these things, right? Self-worth is high, communication is there, the rules are humane. I love that. They're not nuts, because in the unhealthy homes, the rules get crazy because they're all self-protective so that people can feel safe. And whoever has the biggest fist makes the call. Like, how about smoking? I mean, smoking is an addiction. Plenty of people smoke, but we don't think they're bad people. As a matter of fact, from 20 to 2016, we lost 600,000 people to overdose, to illegal drug overdose in those 16 years. Do you know that we lose about 486,000 a year to smoking? A year. I didn't say 16 years. A year. But we're okay with that one, because smoking is not taboo and you're not a bad person if you're addicted to smoking. It's an accepted drug. We just like to give you a hard time with the ones that we just haven't legalized. Then we have one we celebrate, right? Alcohol. That's okay about the deaths. Everybody's got to have a drink occasionally. We have a lot of cultural problems around addiction, man. We all decided which are the good ones and which are the bad ones. All right. Something to think about. The addicted family takes on survival roles. We talked about this to reduce stress, deal with uncertainty, and function. We're going to go through these roles, and then we're going to talk about codependency. The slides on codependency are beefy with a lot of descriptors, because I wanted you to have them, because you have them in your flyer so you can take them with you. I probably won't read every one of them, but I'll touch on ones that I think are the key points that help to describe what codependency looks like. It's interesting. The more I get to know people in general just in my life with the knowledge of what codependency is, it's interesting. Everybody, I think, has a little bit. It's very interesting. Now, there's a healthy level of dependence that we can have on one another, right? We should have that. We're designed to be connected with it. But a codependent, we'll go into this, really finds their value through how they help and assist others, independent of how they help themselves. And they end up coming undone to the service of others. I think we all have it a little bit. It's interesting. And I don't think it's always life controlling, but sometimes it can be. And it can disable relationships when it's severe. But I think there's a little piece of it in each of us, which is an interesting thing. So next slide is the first role. It's the person in addiction, the addict. I need to change that lingo. You know, about 2 years ago, I started to realize the enormous stigma that goes with calling people their condition. And so did the field. And this term addict. It would be like saying a person that has cancer is cancer man. Or if you're a believer, we all believe to some degree that we have a besetting sin in us. So we should refer to each other as sinner at church. Hey, sinner, good to see you. So calling people by their condition really takes away their dignity, right? And so I went back through all my slides and missed this one. That should say the addicted person, right? We should not be defined by our condition. So it's something for you to think about when you're talking to people. Try to catch yourself and not use the word addict. So that's good. I'm seeing this. I need to change that. Actually, I changed it on here, but I didn't change it on that. That's funny. So in this, you see what it says here? The entire family revolves around the addicted person or alcoholic. There's a codependent role that happens there. Understanding the addicted person is very important. Of equal importance is knowing that by making changes in your own actions, you can stop supporting the addictive behavior. This is what we talked about at the beginning, is trying to make decisions independent for healthy reasons of the decisions of your loved ones. To not be hostaged by those decisions and to take some boundaries and some stands and some individual, more lucid, more healthy decisions in response to those behaviors, as opposed to catering and bending with those fold. And so the next slide is the hero. So now we're getting into generally the children in the family, and then we'll eventually come back to the spouse as the codependent. So here's the hero. Now remember, this is where there's generally, it's often the father, it can be the mother, it can be mental illness, doesn't even have to be, it can be a life-controlling issue, it could be a gambler, it can be anything. So what happens is the hero, the oldest child, tries to make the family look normal. The last thing that child wants to do is have anyone look at their family as being negative. So what they do is through their behavior and attitude, they put a protective shell around family. They have a 4.0 GPA. They welcome everyone at the door who knocks the door. Lord forbid they allow anyone else that they see as broken, worse than them, to answer that door. They welcome people and tell them how nicely they're dressed. Hey, that's our new couch. You see our new couch? Yeah, no, mom's sleeping. Yeah, you know, she works doubles. She really supports our family. Mom's addicted. Dad's not even home. And that child will keep that family, the view of that family, well protected. And they'll excel in everything they do. But here's the problem when you look to the bottom of the slide. Here's what's actually happening internally. They're isolated. They have difficulty in later life with intimate relationships because everything is a facade, a projected view of themselves to protect the intimacy of what they're really protecting. In addicted families, Claudia Blackburn, who writes a wonderful book, I just can't think of the name of it right now, but look up her as an author of her first book, Claudia Blackburn. She says that the rule of a family that has an addicted person for everyone in the family is don't think, don't feel, don't talk, because it has no value. Do you understand when you've been removed to the idea with the input into any relationship that you shouldn't think, feel, or talk, you cease to exist. And so you're going to have to, if you're going to stay in that home, you're going to have to figure out what your role is. And so what happens is that we take on these roles based on that rule. Don't think, don't talk, don't feel, because it has no value. When I bring it to my addicted caregivers, there's no value. There's no return on the investment. They're usually emotionally unavailable to me, physically unavailable. They're not home. They're going through an enormous level of different mood swings. There's highs and lows that can be extreme highs, where everybody's going to Disney until we get to the rest stop and dad doesn't come out of the bathroom. There's your extreme low, bandaged on the side of the highway. And so this is the life of a person really growing up in an addicted home, is that it's terribly inconsistent and terribly unpredictable. And that becomes one of the risk factors for people that begin to start entertaining the idea of using, which is still their responsibility. Even the home and the people don't own that. When you use, that's your responsibility. But that often will become a variable that gets people interested in numbing back some of that inconsistency and unpredictability, is growing up in a home that's inconsistent and unpredictable. It's one of the highest risk factors that we point to for why people end up wanting to use drugs and alcohol, to buffer and to get to, because when you're high in that moment, it feels like a place of consistency. All that emotional dysregulation, when you get high, goes boop. There's no concern about yesterday or tomorrow. You can stay in the now without any fatigue of thought, guilt, shame, animosity, anger, threat to your life. You can just go into a little cocoon. And so the hero tends to suffer from illness and stress. There's a lot of conditions that happen as a result of being in a very contentious environment, right? PTSD is certainly a good example of how people can become assertively, egregiously affected by conditions, right? And so we can take on some things. All these things are treatable, and they can be. There's great resolve and freedom that can be found through them, but sometimes we have to identify them to work through them. So the next slide speaks to the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the troublemaker. I have. So let me share with you. So part of my growing up in my home was shared. Scapegoat came later in my life. There's another one on here was the earlier part of my life. So the scapegoat is the wild one. He's the guy in the crowd that does all the risk taking because that's how he gets his value and identity, or hers, by being the one that will do anything. It also creates a level of treating people how to teach you because it's very intimidating. It's the person with the purple hair when no one else in school has purple hair. It's the person who got the first tattoo in a crazy place. It's the one with the first piercing on their tongue. It's the person who steps out first and usually does the craziest thing to garner the most view of them and to teach people this is who I am. It's also a protective factor because if you're crazy on your own self and the things you'll do to yourself, you might be crazy what you'll do to me. And it keeps that person safe and it gives them a sort of value and more so even a sort of status in that environment. So maybe you're identifying some of that. Maybe that was you. In high school, this became my role. I became a punk rocker in high school. And it wasn't the punk rock of like purple hair. It's like where you shave your head without a mirror at home. And you come to school and see how it's going to look. I've had stitches 7 times, and I have about 3 or 4 broken bones. Every single one of those was preceded by the words, "Watch this." Every one of them, in crowds. So it's a very overt. The scapegoat is often the one that will go into addiction as well. This is the one we seem to indicate that will find their way into addiction. Because they're not afraid to experiment, man. Hand it to me. When everyone else is poking at things, wondering what it is, the scapegoat walks up and puts it right in their mouth. And so maybe that was you. The thing I guess we got to ask ourselves, I hope it isn't still how we're operating today, because a high level of risk can sometimes, without discernment, have a high level of consequence. And so they tend to be clever and leaders. They're very influential because there's something about the fearlessness of the scapegoat that people will follow, even if they're going to walk right into a snake's den. It's amazing how they'll influence people to come with. And they tend to get followers, which is interesting. Minions. And so now think about the scapegoat in terms of maybe some of the world leaders of our day in our history. Maybe some of them were scapegoats. Because this is a timeless perspective. Just because Claudia Blackburn, who's one who established these roles, came up with this probably in the 60s, I think it was. This is humanity, and addiction's been happening in humanity since probably the inception of anything that would alter our mind, right? I mean, look how long alcohol's been in our culture. It goes back to, 3-digit dates, 2-digit dates. And so, also very sexually promiscuous, right? That goes also with risk-taking. Fighting, right? Not afraid to take the pain for the value of how it will look. When I was in a scapegoat mode, what I realized, and I was never a big guy, and I was never not afraid to fight. There's always some level of fear. But what I realized is if you pick a fight with the biggest guy and you're a small guy, it's a win-win. Because if you win, you're an unbelievable human being. If you lose, it was expected. But what you've done is you've taught the crowd, don't mess with me. It's a terrible thing. Thank God you get a little older and the testosterone goes out of your body too while you're trying to get well. Last thing I want to do is fight anybody. And so it's just this process of that scapegoat. The reason I focus on that one so much is because it's so overt. It's so overt, and it goes into society, and they can, with enough training and enough nurturing, can become all those things in healthy ways. Overt, outward, extroverted, great leader. All that stuff can happen, and that can happen for each of these roles. So the next role is the mascot. This is the Joker. Everything gets deflected back to humor. We're watching TV and Dad throws up in a drunken stupor all down his chest. And then the scapegoat goes, well, there goes my appetite for pea soup. I wanted pea soup. And it returns everything to humor. Because it deflects away from, because when those terrible things happen in the room, everyone is astounded by them and perplexed. And what comes over the people outside of the mascot, who's also experiencing it, is fear. And so the mascot tries to remove the fear and tries to normalize things through humor, because humor makes things seem lesser than they are, right? It seems to depreciate the value of the difficulty. And so this is what they do. This is the class clown in school a lot of times. Now we're talking about maybe your yearbook thing, right? I'm not saying you were the mascot, but were you the class clown? Who knows? Don't get me wrong, when we're identifying these roles, again, it's not a bad thing to identify yourself in these roles. It's an awareness thing and say, wow, that might have been me. Because I would say for the most part, you've probably learned over time how to adapt those roles into everyday functioning. Unless maybe you're experiencing some breakdowns as a result of these, and then maybe need to address those. But in most cases, we learn over time to adapt these things to fairly socially acceptable ways. But they will rear their head, though, in the most intimate of our relationships, where we're in the quiet of our moments in our lives, and generally in our homes, for the people who know us best. There's parts that will still come out. And so, but here's what's really happening inside, right? Busy, 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 right? Always taskmaster, because humor is the deflection, and so is staying busy. If I keep resolving all the small tasks and I just stay a taskmaster, I'm always fixing something, which is helpful for me. Even if I'm just emptying the dishwasher 3 times this week, it's a feeling of fixing it. And it gives me a sense of semblance and value and worth, and I'm staying busy and deflecting away. Well, the other bigger problems, at least I'm taking care of these smaller ones. And it's just a crazy thing. But also anxiety and depression becomes a big thing for the mascot, and also they have a propensity to turn to drugs and alcohol as well to help them slow down or handle the anxiety. So as opposed to the risk taker of the mascot, the drug use comes for them because actually it's trying to be medication, right? I remember having a counselee who became an alcoholic, and we had to do the work, right? The historic nature of what came first, the chicken or the egg, your anxiety or your alcohol use. And he had social anxiety and had been medicated for it for a lot of his life. And what he learned over time is that he didn't like the effect of the medicine, the side effects, which had terrible things in his social life. And he also realized that it could create social mechanisms by being a drinker in drinking environments because there's a level of acceptance. And when he drank, he felt confident and free of all the anxiety. But you know what the problem is one of the leading issues, results of drinking is it creates all kinds of undue anxiety when you're not drinking. So he put himself in this terrible, vicious circle where he would drink to feel peace, and the drinking would end up causing more anxiety, which would make him want to drink more. And so we realized that the counsel needed to be heavily around social anxiety and not just alcoholism, because as it turned out, really social anxiety was really the issue. It was the primary, and the secondary was the drinking. And so what was the goal there then? To figure out what's going to be the remedy in healthy ways for the anxiety that doesn't have a side effect that exacerbates the anxiety, right? And so the mascot's the jokers. The mascot's the sarcastic person. The person you can never have just a regular conversation with. It's always a return to humor. It's always sarcastic. Somewhere in the paragraph of the dialogue, there's going to be sarcasm. It's interesting. Some people will tell you that sarcasm is actually a socially acceptable way to manifest anger. We mask it through humor, but they say it's actually a little piece of anger. And listen, I love good sarcasm. I just try not to do it at the expense of anyone. But sarcasm is great. It's brilliant. It takes a lot of thinking to be sarcastic. This part of me appreciates it. But we just have to be careful that it's not at the expense of others, right? There's no value in that. Next slide. Here's the lost child. This is probably where I began. The lost child seems defiant, hostile, and angry. It's usually the second born. And there's order of placement, right? That's interesting. There's an order of where it happens, it seems, for whatever reason. I'm looking at the wrong one here. The scapegoat's the second child, I'm sorry. Oh, hey, what? Don't do that. Darn technology. Me and technology, we're just not friends. Okay, there it is. Lost child is basically the child, you see the image, is the child who disappears within themselves. The safest place for them is within themselves, because what they learned in their simple society by the other people in the place, including the other siblings that all took those other roles, is that people are way too complex, man. I can't do it because I'm already having the complexity of figuring out how I feel about all of this. That's a full-time job, man. So the last thing I ever want to do is be around for anything more than 15 minutes, any social groups where I have to also balance the complexity of everybody else's views and attitudes, especially when they could be hostile or threatening. So the safest place for me is to just go inside of myself. The lost child is the one that you can hand them 2 army men, 1 army man, and they'll spend 45 an hour on the floor with 1 army man bouncing them off the bed and look like they're having a great time. Totally self-contained. Sometimes parents say that's your easiest child. And so what's happening is that child is learning that it just takes too much complexity to field all the things. Remember, there's certainly a part of any child or any human being that just by tendency outside of an unhealthy environment, so I don't want to skew your scope of a child that finds their ability to stay self-content. Doesn't mean it's unhealthy. They just might be an introverted child that finds a lot of relief in it, but at the same time, you don't find any other awkward manifestations when they are in a social environment. They can still cope and adapt, but their preference is, I'm very extroverted when it calls for being extroverted. You know, my arms are going over. But if you asked me what my preference is, dinner and a movie with my wife or going to a party or a club, it's always dinner and a movie with my wife. I absolutely prefer the intimacy of small settings. That's never changed for me. And I don't have an unhealthy life as a result of that. And because there is a time to do that. So in these moments, it's very easy for me then to also be extroverted because this moment calls for the extroversion. So, and what I'm describing is you as well. You have a preference of where you get energized by extroversion, or does extroversion drain you? Are you energized by introversion, by the small moments, or do those drain you and you need the big moments? Every person has to figure out what saps them and what energizes. And that's how you can usually figure out whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Where do you feel energized and where do you feel sapped? And none of those are bad unless it's come as a result of a place of escape and hiding. And we do it to such a degree that we lose the maintenance of the other domains of our life. And that's where things become unhealthy. So you might be a humorous and fun guy, as the mascot might suggest, but you're able to maintenance all the other areas of your life. There's no breakdown happening because there are funny people, right? So there's a way to look at this that has an unhealthy part of it and an unhealthy. We're talking about the unhealthy way, where it controls the other aspects of our lives. But the lost child stays away from anything new and will resist change, because change and walking into things new also increases a state of vulnerability. When I go into my own world, I reduce to the best of my ability any chance of being vulnerable to outside input by staying away from it. Because what we learn, and some of us still have vulnerability issues, you know it, check your marriage. Vulnerability tends to indicate for us, if we're not careful with it, that it indicates weakness. It'll provide a place of weakness or where you can be targeted for harm. And I don't mean by guns, I mean just by somebody's view. And so what we learn is that it creates a vulnerability that could lead to a weakness as identified, and it could make you vulnerable to experience pain. So the best thing to do is stay away from it, because pain ultimately means death. So we take vulnerability in our relationships, and if you keep trailing it down, it's actually a fear of dying. It's amazing, because it's a survival instinct to not be vulnerable. Here's the problem. There is no healthy relationship or chance for any growth and development in any relationship if it does not begin and become founded on trust, and trust includes vulnerability. We have to be vulnerable for our relationships if they're going to grow. I have to be able to go to my wife without her fear of view of me that I have a fear of something, right? She has to be able to know the internal mechanisms of why I'm making the decisions I'm making. Sometimes I find myself processing without her, and she'll look at me and go, "What's up, Jakubowski? Where'd you go?" And I realize that I'm trying to resolve things without her inclusion, because in my mind, to some degree, it'd be safer. Maybe it's her view of the issue. I don't want her input because it'll have it. That vulnerable state and keeping things out in the open, keeping a level of transparency, is really the basis of what creates very healthy and strong relationships. And then there has to be an enormous commitment and protective commitment to those vulnerabilities. And that's where you'll see a family or a couple say, "You didn't have my back," right? I gave you all of me, and in that moment, you didn't have my back. And it becomes something that's going to have to be talked about, because maybe the person didn't have their back. They let a vulnerability go out that they did not keep close to the chest. And so, these are all the inner workings that are happening. But again, the things that we're talking about is that these roles create issues in later life, and not only just in this part of the life, because it becomes disabling to our own development. So the lost child avoids trouble. They also can develop physical problems. Some may never marry because they have difficult and intimate relationships, because it requires taking a risk on vulnerability. And we've learned the problem. There's absolutely no evidence against the fact that if I create a bunch of walls in my life and I keep most people at a distance, I will absolutely reduce the chance of being negatively affected by those people, for sure. I stay home. I knew a young woman who was a dear friend of mine, and she wanted to be married, but she was unwilling to leave her home because to go out there and to be in those social things. I would say, oh, then the mailman's going to have to be your husband. I mean, somebody's going to have to come to you. And so, you know, so we can create all these walls and we can keep people at a distance and very effectively. And we will, to some degree, keep out harm that might have come just to the natural context of dealing with other people. But you know what else you keep out, right? All the opportunities for growth, wellness, and greater levels of development. Those also all stay out. So the fortress we build will certainly keep out what is negative, but it also is built to keep out what is great. And as believers, as people coming into Teen Challenge, your loved ones, that's one of the things we're learning, is that the trust that I'm going to endow on my life and the wall that I'm going to come out from behind, God is going to be my strong tower. God is going to be the advocate and defender of my soul. My value is found in God. My identity is found in the Lord. It's not found in the opinions of man. So I don't have to be fearful of man's opinions. When my ways are pleasing to the Lord, then even my enemies will be at peace with me, says the Bible. So this is what your loved ones are learning. And what we're learning is when we find that level of security, we can come out from behind the wall because God serves as the wall for when it's necessary. Doesn't mean we walk headlong like a fool. The Bible also says only a fool continues to move forward when he sees trouble coming and continues to move towards it. So we also have an enormous level of discernment that comes in human development of when it's a time to be vulnerable and when it's not a time to be vulnerable, right? And so this process has to happen for all the healing through all these roles. And we are definitely coming up to our thing. So I want to get moving. So the caretaker role, this is the codependent. This is the enabler in the family. And the caretaker really goes, and we're going to talk about all the codependent things, but the caretaker is usually the spouse. When this study was done, generally the addicted person was the father, and generally the codependent was the wife, which still it seems to be a blend today in the most common way in families. And the issue here, too, and what becomes a terrible combination is an addicted person and a codependent person. The addicted person needs to be taken care of. They want people to constantly fix their problems and make things better so they can stay the same. Help me to avoid all of my consequences and be the shoulder I can cry on so I can get back tomorrow and do the same thing I was doing today. But guess what the codependent wants to be? They get all of their value in doing that, in being the caregiver, in being the one that will surrender all their own basic needs to make sure that that person they love are all met. Even if it means mustard sandwiches for you and steak for me and the whole time we're married. Because I feel the stake is in serving you. Now it gets tricky because you would say, well, there's a part of a kind of a Christian mentality that says that we're called to serve others, right? But it also does not say at the expense of our own calling, at the expense of our own passions and pursuits. It should be seamless and happening in the context of both. This is an impaired state. In the service to others, when I'm serving others, I feel bolstered and enriched. I don't feel depleted that I've lost myself. Matter of fact, when I'm serving you, I feel like I'm gaining something from the Lord in my allegiance first to Him before it's to even you, my wife, or anyone else. I feel a reciprocal response, right? It's energizing and it's fulfilling. And so the problem is that the caregiver loses themselves. They become unavailable to anyone else. Their whole life is focused on the obsession with meeting the need of the addicted. Sometimes protective because they feel as though those actions also protect the rest of the family. I'll be the one that takes the brunt of the addicted person. They train the addicted person to put the brunt on them and not on the family. But they're coming undone because it slips into codependency. And we have 5 minutes, so all I'm going to do is just kind of go down these slides. You guys have these. You guys have these booklets? You do. If you don't, you can get them. Amber, we have the booklets for this slide, for this presentation? Yeah. If you don't have one, get it, because the information we're going to go down now is in there, the thing that has value. What I want you to do, because we can't cover it all in this time, and I didn't intend to. I want to spend most of the time on the roles. But I want you to take that book, and I want you to look at it, and I want you to try to identify, are there some areas in your life where you're giving to such a degree to others, according to kind of the way codependency looks, to where you're losing yourself. The Bible says to love yourself as much, or to love others as what? As you love yourself. It doesn't say more. It says as much. So you can't lose care of yourself for care of others. You still have to love you. You understand when you told your loved one to come into Teen Challenge, I hope you know that some of the reason why you told them to come, and you don't have to feel guilty about this, is that you love yourself as much as them, and we're done doing this. I like me, and I'm not going to lose me. Sorry, not for you or anybody. I equally value myself as I equally value you. None of us gets higher respect by God. So I'm not going to beat me up anymore over your decisions. I'm just not. I love you, and I'll support every good decision you make, and I'll help to deter the bad ones you make. But I'm not going to I'm not going to lose my love of myself over it. It's not a haughty or proudful love. It's an understanding of your value and being set in it and not being deterred by anyone, that your value is perfect. There's no one in this room that has greater value than another human being on the planet. I mean everyone. None of us have greater value than Billy Graham, if we want to use him as a faith base. You have the same value as him and the President of the United States. You know also you have equal value to? Hitler. What? You don't have the same behavior, and there's more character work that definitely has to be done, but according to God, Hitler has the same value as you. He created Hitler with perfect value. The choices he made after that, God doesn't own what will help you work through. Right? God owns your value, not your behavior. Thank God we're not judged by a king or something larger than ourselves by our behavior. Oh my goodness, if our value was determined by our behavior, by the creator of our life, whatever that is for you, well, we'd all be popping into little things of dust right now. Bloop, 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 bloop. Oh my goodness, I better check my day. I guarantee you by the end of this day, my behavior will be somewhat disrespectful somewhere. I might just be impatient to the lady at Walmart. Bloop, done. We are not our value by our faith structure, whatever that is for you, whatever religion, the idea of that for us is that thing for us, whatever we've chosen as the author of our life, as our higher power, if you will, and for us it's God of the Bible, we should also understand that whatever the source of that's going to be, is that it's not a conditional relationship on behavior. It's a love and a relationship based on value with an active God that will help. Oh my gosh, I don't know how we would have anything higher above us that would think otherwise. What would we do every day? So the pleasing nature then of that higher source for us, the reason I'm sharing this is just what your loved ones are learning. Can you imagine if it was based on my acts of goodness? Well, this week I helped 14 elderly women cross the street. And then I get to heaven and God says, sorry, it's supposed to be 16. Where's the manual? I didn't know it was 16. That was a setup for failure. It's found in our value. It's found in the great, enormous level of our value. And so this is what we have to understand about this. And so what happens for the caregiver and the codependent is they give up their value to support only the value of the other person. And they lost the call in their life by God, or the destiny and the fate that the plan was for their life in their own personal and independent empowerment. Everyone in this room has an enormous level of giftings, passions, and talents. Some of them you're aware of, and some of them had to be revealed to you, if you're certainly a person of faith, by your faith. You may have found that you had an incredible gift of compassion. You're the one crying every time there's a Holt or a Compassion International commercial. You can't see a dog in a kennel shivering without crying. You probably have the gift of compassion. So not everybody cries over that. You understand that, right? You might have the gift of mercy. You know, where you feel this compelling need to help others, even at the expense of your own need. Just had a horrible phone call. One of the best people you ever knew in your life died, and you look over and there's somebody you love struggling, and you give all yours up for that moment to minister to theirs. That's a gift. You understand? Not everybody can do that, right? They just can't. People become very consumed in their own thing and try to do their best to give you a little piece of themselves. Some people have the ability to set all their mess down to come and just deal with yours and never mention theirs. That's remarkable to me. Some of you can articulate stories to people and almost put them in the setting. You get people into your description and they're with you and they're baited on breath, waiting for the next thing you're going to say. You probably have the gift of teaching. You also know your gifts, and some of you have performance gifts where you know you can draw, teach, sing. Those all, you already knew those. Those were kind of innate. Many have to be revealed. And by the way, at any age. At any age. Because it's amazing how the context of working and working within the context of humanity and bouncing our lives off of other people and experiences, good and bad, tends to evidence and bring to the surface what our strengths and our talents and our skills and our passions are. You know this. I mean, I know you know this. And so some reason I share it with you is because this is also what we're sharing with your loved ones. That some of their passions, giftings, and talents they're aware of. You even know what they are. You know your loved one can draw. When they leave this program, they should have been able, with the right pursuit of this, and hopefully relying on God, taking a chance on God, let's put it that way, to reveal it to them and to show them what more have you in store for me. And by the time they leave, they're walking out on a gifting and a talent that they may never have known existed. And again, That can happen for each one of us at any point, but I think we lose view of what talents, giftings, and passions are. I just gave you a descriptor of 3. And in the house and the kingdom of God, they matter for earth. And to walk in those is a wonderful thing. Sometimes when folks retire, they find themselves going into volunteer work. Didn't you ever wonder why you go volunteer, why you did? It's probably directly based on your gifting, your passion, and your talents. We just said, I think I'd like to work there. There's nothing to do with liking it. It's who you're designed to be. It's remarkable. There's design for who we are. There truly is, folks. And some of you are fully aware of it on your standards. All of you are, in terms of what your standard call was. But don't be afraid to imagine for a moment that there's more that God wants to ornament in your life at any age. And be open to it and say, I want you to bring me the next thing that I'm just not aware of. I want that in my life. Show me my passion. Let me walk in that. So this, and I'm going to close, but if we go down this list of the codependents, we talked about it already a lot, is it's really essentially where a person is losing themselves to the care of another, and they abandon everything that was intended for them. It's just not fair to that person. It's not even fair to the person you're doing it with, because then I only really get half of you. I get the half that serves me, but I never get to see the half that serves you. I want to see how you bolster your life. I want you to tell me about the next thing you're going to do today. We got to go away for the weekend, and I'm going to be okay with it because I trust you and I love you. You're going to a retreat because you want to get closer to God. Awesome, I'll be fine. Unless I'm addicted, then you're not going anywhere. What about, how am I going to do this? Who's going to cook? Well, I guess you're going to have to work that out, man, because I'm not going to give up the call on my life. Because I'm going to a retreat doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I also what? I also love me. You shouldn't be in a relationship where both people don't love themselves as much as they love you. And my hope for you is that you love him better than both of you. So let me get out of here. Look at that list, process it, see if you can find some things in that. There's also a group out there, if you've identified that you have codependency issues, there's actually a group called Codependents Anonymous. It's a wonderful group. And there's another one called Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous, where it doesn't involve anyone but the family who's dealing with that issue. It doesn't involve the addicted person. It's just for the people who are experiencing those problems. Don't be afraid to get support. Go get support. Everybody's afraid to go get support because somehow they're going to put themselves out there. It's a vulnerability issue. All you have to do to go to any one of those groups is say, give up one little piece of what you're experiencing in one of those groups, and you'll see all the heads bobbing. Once you get all the heads bobbing, you'll keep going because you're going to have spoke for them. Thank you. Appreciate you. Keep coming. Good things are happening. Good things are happening.